The ISV Iron Meridian was not supposed to be there. According to every piece of intelligence Captain Zareth had gathered over the past 3 rotations, the human vessel drifting at the edge of the Kelvari Nebula was a damaged supply freighter, slow, lightly armed. Its crew of 40 reduced to half by a reactor coolant leak. An easy prize. A clean capture. Exactly the kind of soft target the Vorkai Syndicate sent him to harvest. He should have looked closer at the silhouette. Boarding pods away, his second-in-command, Urek, announced with satisfaction. 6 magnetic boarding tubes screamed across the void, latching onto the human vessel's hull with deep, resonant clangs that vibrated through Zareth's bones even at this distance. 40 warriors inserted. Compartments Gamma 3 through Delta 6. Zareth leaned back in his command chair, already composing his after-action report in his head. Seized human vessel. Minimal resistance. Crew taken for leverage. Standard. Routine. Profitable. Then the human ship's running lights changed. They had been amber, the universal color of a vessel in distress. Now they shifted, slowly, deliberately, to a deep and burning red. Urek's mandibles clicked with sudden unease. Captain, that color configuration. I see it. Zareth sat forward. That is not a freighter color code. No, Zareth said quietly. It is not. Inside the ISV Iron Meridian, Admiral Darian Voss stood at the center of Combat Information Command with both hands clasped behind his back, watching the boarding pod impact indicators light up on the holographic display like a constellation of mistakes. He was 61 years old. He had silver hair, a jaw like carved stone, and 17 years of deep space combat tattooed into the creases of his face. He had survived the Battle of Reach Station, the Siege of Callisto, and a mutiny that the official records still euphemistically called a crew dispute. He did not panic. He did not raise his voice. How many? He asked. 42 hostiles confirmed, Admiral, said Lieutenant Commander Priya Okafor without looking up from her console. 6 entry points. They're moving in 2 groups, one toward engineering, one toward the bridge. They think this is a freighter. Yes, sir. The reactor leak was real enough to fool their sensors. We've been running cold signatures for 6 days. Voss allowed himself a small, private smile. 6 days of drifting. 6 days of letting Syndicate scouts watch them limp through the nebula. 6 days of patience. Seal the internal bulkheads, he said. Reroute life support to combat configuration. And tell Sergeant Major Hale she has my permission to be thoroughly unpleasant. Okafor almost smiled. Aye, Admiral. Sergeant Major Denna Hale was already waiting. She stood at the junction of Corridor 7 with 38 soldiers in full vacuum combat armor, weapons hot, breathing slow. She was not a large woman by any standard metric, 5'6", lean, with close-cropped hair and pale gray eyes that had stopped showing emotion in combat approximately a decade ago. What she lacked in size she had replaced entirely with precision and a very particular kind of patience that other soldiers described, in hushed tones, as predatory. When the bulkhead ahead of her buckled and the Vorkai warriors came through in a screaming tide of bladed limbs and sonic weaponry, she didn't flinch. She pressed the detonator for the shaped charge net she'd installed in the corridor 3 hours ago. The explosion wasn't large. It didn't need to be. It was surgical, designed to stun, to disorient, to scatter. 14 Vorkai went down in the first 4 seconds. The remaining advance warriors stumbled into overlapping fields of fire from soldiers who had been completely invisible behind mag-locked wall panels. It lasted 11 seconds. When it was over, Hale stepped forward over the debris and looked down at the one surviving conscious alien, a young warrior, trembling, his sensory crest flat against his skull in what every xenobiologist agreed was the Vorkai equivalent of absolute terror. Tell your captain, she said in passable Vorkai tradespeak, her voice conversational, that he boarded a marine assault carrier. And tell him that was the nice corridor. On the Syndicate dagger, Zareth received the message. He received it because 3 of his warriors had fought their way back to a boarding tube and screamed it into their communicators before the tube sealed behind them. He received it accompanied by partial helmet cam footage that showed things he did not entirely have context for: human soldiers moving through smoke like they had trained inside of smoke, like smoke was simply where they lived, coordinating without visible signals, covering angles that should not have been coverable. He received it, and then he sat very still for a long moment. "They have how many crew?" he said. Urek pulled up the intelligence file. "Our source indicated approximately 200 and..." He stopped. Recalculated. His mandibles clicked rapidly. "The ship class." "Captain, I misidentified the ship class. The profile is consistent with a Marauder-class assault carrier. Standard complement is 680 combat personnel." 680. He had sent 42. "Get them out," Zareth said. "Get them out now." But the human ship had already locked the boarding tubes from the inside. Admiral Voss watched the Syndicate vessel begin its emergency burn and did not move to stop it. "They're running," Okafor reported. "Let them." "Admiral? We have their boarding parties. We have their hull configuration on record. We have their captain's decision-making pattern." Voss turned from the display. "They'll report back to whoever sent them. And those people will know that the Iron Meridian is not a freighter. That it never was. That it was waiting for them." He picked up his cold coffee from the console edge and finally took a sip. "That information," he said, "is worth more to us than their ship." Okafor absorbed this. After a moment, she asked, "Were we always the bait, sir?" "We were always the trap, Lieutenant Commander." "There's a difference." He set the cup down. "Bait gets consumed. Traps catch things." In the medical bay, the surviving Vorkai warriors were being processed, disarmed, treated for injuries with the same efficiency the humans applied to everything else, interviewed by a xenolinguist who seemed genuinely fascinated by their sensory crests. One of them, a veteran named Dorak who had boarded 11 vessels across his career and survived every one, sat on a human medical cot and tried to make sense of what he'd experienced. The humans had not been panicked. That was the part that kept returning to him. Every other species Dorak had boarded, the Kalari, the Septembervorn, the even-tempered Dulani, they had all responded to sudden violent intrusion with some version of panic. Screaming, running, hiding, begging. It was the normal response. The reasonable response. The humans had been waiting. They had damaged their own ship, drifted for 6 days in a hazardous nebula, and waited. For boarders. In a corridor rigged with explosives they had installed with patient, professional care. With soldiers who moved through a fight like they were doing something they had done many times before, in many forms, and found neither terrifying nor exciting, just work. Dorak looked at the human medic currently treating the plasma burn on his left arm. She was young, focused, utterly unbothered by the fact that he was twice her mass and had, 20 minutes ago, been trying to kill her crewmates. "You knew we were coming," he said. She glanced up. "Yep. You set the whole thing. The leak. The drift. Above my pay grade," she said, and returned to his arm. "Hold still." Dorak held still. He thought about the Syndicate intelligence network, which had apparently watched humans for 6 days and seen only a wounded freighter. He thought about the admiral he'd glimpsed briefly on a corridor display, older, quiet, with the expression of a man who found ambushes boring. He thought about the 42 warriors who had boarded a vessel they thought was helpless. "Your species," he said carefully, "is deeply strange." The medic looked up again. This time she was almost smiling. "Yeah," she agreed. "We get that a lot." 3 weeks later, a Syndicate intelligence report circulated through 17 criminal networks across the Kelvari Reach. It was terse, and it was taken seriously, and it said 3 things. Do not engage vessels broadcasting the ISV Meridian transponder code. Do not board any human ship that has not fired first. Do not assume that a human vessel is helpless because it appears to be helpless. At the bottom, someone had added, by hand, in Vorkai script, the message Sergeant Major Hale had delivered in the corridor. That was the nice corridor. No one asked for clarification. Everyone understood. In a universe full of civilizations that had learned to fear the dark between stars, humanity had learned something different. They had learned to use it. To drift in it. To wait inside it with weapons ready and patience that other species found, frankly, unsettling. They were not the strongest species. Not the fastest. Not the most ancient. They were simply the ones who had decided, somewhere in their long and violent history, that being underestimated was not a weakness. It was a strategy.